So today I wanted to do a deep dive in the music of Final Fantasy IX. Composed by Nobuo Uematsu, the longtime series composer of Final Fantasy. It's full of so many memorable melodies, great character themes, and music that I think really perfectly captures the vibe of the game overall. And to dig a little bit deeper, I've brought on a friend of mine who's actually a composer and recently wrote this book right here, A Book to Call Home, which is a deep dive on Final Fantasy IX's musical themes and character analysis and all that stuff. And I think this is a really great interview that's going to be well worth your time. Check out the interview. I think you guys are going to love this. You're going to love Emmy, our guest today, and what he has to say about Final Fantasy IX. So here's the interview. Okay, so I am here with a great friend of mine, Emmy G. Quinta, or Emiliano G. Quinta. How are you going today? It's so great to have you on the channel.
Thanks, Erek, for inviting me. It's been so far a great day. I'm very excited to talk about a lot of things with you and, of course, Final Fantasy.
Yes, so we're going to get into the music of Final Fantasy IX. That's what this episode is all about. And you do have somewhat of an authority to speak on this as well. But before we get to all that, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what your background is, just to kind of set it up.
Of course. So, as you presented me, I'm Emiliano G. Quinta. I'm a music composer, video game music composer, and also the author of A Book to Call Home, which is basically a music analysis and contextual analysis on the music of Final Fantasy IX. That's basically my present day, but if you would add a bit more about that, yeah, a long life of music since teenager days, like doing some rock, having a band, and at some point I was like, well, becoming a rock star is not happening anytime soon. But I can picture myself actually doing music for video games. And there was a very specific moment in my life. I met, not personally, but I went to a concert of Distant Wars in Buenos Aires, in which in the attendance was Nobuo Uematsu. That was, I think, 2014. And then I was like so blown away by not just the music of one of my favorite games, but, seeing all around me growing up, man, and ladies crying out of the beauty of the music, and I was like, it's so nice to bring these emotions to the audience. So I could picture myself that was my new dream, and here we are in that track.
Yeah, well, that's great. I think it's really wonderful to meet like-minded people who understand Final Fantasy and JRPGs just as games, but also understanding them on a deeper level as well, like musically. Because the music is really just the backdrop for all the emotions. The music tells the story where words cannot, and it also tells you kind of what you're supposed to feel in those moments as well. And that's really cool. And that's something that you talk about in your book, A Book to Call Home, which you so wonderfully sent to me. I mean, I paid for it, of course, but you know what I mean. So you wonderfully sent to me. Because I like supporting stuff like this. And full transparency for the viewers out there, you started a YouTube channel doing music analysis, which is basically like video versions of your book so far with Final Fantasy IX stuff. I know about all this because I've been editing your videos as well. You've contacted me to do all that, and I'm really great to form a wonderful partnership with you. And I'm also learning a bit more about Final Fantasy IX and the music as well, because I just think it's a wonderful game. And almost, I would say, would you agree with the fact that it's kind of like maybe underappreciated as well?
Indeed, I have the impression that for both Nobuo Uematsu and Sakaguchi to arrive to the moment in which they created Final Fantasy IX, a lot of things have to happen, right? And we had before like masterpieces like Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII, and we cannot leave out of the discussion all that experience they collected to build this game. It really was for them like a project that they dedicated a lot of love, and I think the outcome of the project it's also a masterpiece. I believe some people like it less than maybe 7 or 10, which are famous games on the saga, but in my opinion, it's genuinely a masterpiece, both artistically, music-wise, and gameplay-wise. I think it's very fun to play.
Yeah. Now, before I jump into the game stuff, I want to ask, because you do have your book here, and there's going to be a link in the description for people who want to buy physical versions, and then you can also get the ebook as well through Amazon, I think. What made you want to write this? Because I think it's wonderful that you can appreciate Final Fantasy IX or Final Fantasy in general, but to take the time to actually write a book that's not just about the story, but a deep dive on the music. Like, what made you want to do that? I think that's really interesting.
So I think two things happen at the same time. The first one is the fact that I started theory in music a bit later in my life. I studied first like software engineering and so on. I have been a musician for like plus 20 years, but I did get the musical theory knowledge through university, through Berkeley, a bit later in my life. So once I had all that background, I was like, I think it's time for me to revisit the music that inspired me as a kid, as a teenager, as a grown-up. And my first stop was Final Fantasy IX. And then I took the time to study the different songs, and I was like, if I can invest this time writing it into words and really having the musical analysis, why should not I share this with the world? And it really became like just a small journal I would have, like a little exercise of a few different songs and trying to understand how it was conceived, not just from the music theoretical perspective, but also what built this ecosystem, vision, cosmos that will make the game. And yeah, this collection of different notes and a small journal I had evolved into a little book. And that little book was like, well, maybe I could formally make a book. And that's how the book came to be.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's wonderful that you can enjoy something and then realize it just kind of snowballs, and you're all of a sudden you're sitting on a draft of a book, and then you've self-published this, have you? So you've done everything yourself to get this up off the ground. I just think it's great, and it's definitely a love letter to Final Fantasy, Nobuo Uematsu's work, and then Final Fantasy IX. Because there's lots of great things in here that I'm going to get into with this question here. A lot of people don't realize there's the motifs, the leitmotifs, like a lot of recurring themes, and this is something that I've learned through your videos as well. Like a lot of character themes use these motifs. So talk a little bit about how Uematsu wove those notes into there, like even down to Steiner's theme having some of the same phrasing as A Place to Call Home, which is the theme of Final Fantasy IX.
Well, that's a very good question. I would say that first and foremost that Uematsu is a very leitmotif-driven composer. Like many of his themes and songs are memorable. And from there, we need to also understand the music composing for a game. It happens through different stages, right? Differently to movies, where ideally you already have the movie kind of recorded and you can compose to the picture. In video games, it happens in parallel to the development of the game. So that being the case, and in close collaboration with Hinaro Sakaguchi, the director of the games, clearly he has some notes, some descriptions of the characters that would inspire him to do the music. And that brings me to the second part, like how do we end up with different themes for Zidane, Bibi, Steiner, Garnet, and so on. And one of the ideas that they had for this game is to assign each character to a virtue, right? Which, again, for Zidane, for Bibi, for example, is sorrow, for Steiner is dilemma, for Garnet is devotion, and so on. These were clearly the starting point for Uematsu to have a discussion with Sakaguchi. Okay, what kind of music would suit this character? And from there, he created like a spider web that define the different components that build the world of both Gaia and Terra, both worlds of the game. You asked me specifically, how is it possible that Steiner might have something of a place to call home, the main theme of Final Fantasy IX. And the reality is, if you replay the game, maybe the first time it doesn't look like it, but if you replay the game, you realize that all of the characters are seeking a purpose in life. They are seeking their own home. Where's that home, right? And there's two possible answers to why Steiner, for example, might have some of these notes in his melody. One is simply because it's a easy, common musical motif, Dorian scale. But I really prefer to have the take of, well, there's something else in there. Steiner is a character defined by, again, his virtuous dilemma, which in Japanese is kato, which translates more to entanglement of vines, which it's his brain. Like, this guy sworn to protect the princess, but also his kingdom. And his kingdom at some point is against his princess. So is his duty more important than the safety of the princess? Like, at some point, his whole structure, mental structure, shatters, right? And that's why the music reflects like this sloppiness, like a slow, like it's a night, but it's not so heroic. It's actually his mind being entangled. In that context, is that we hear a place to call home first notes. Why? Because in the end, from moment zero, Steiner is in Alexandria. He knows what his place is. He knows what his home is. Then it gets challenged. Then he realizes that maybe it's not the perfect scenario. But he starts the game on moment zero knowing what's his home. And I think that musically, that reflects beautifully his trajectory as a character.
Yes, I think it's a wonderful thing that Uematsu has done. And you can play the game and not really understand like the thematic weight of everything. But like the theme of Steiner totally tells the story of his character arc, and you can only know that through having played the game. He starts off being the captain of the Knights of Pluto, and then all of a sudden, yes, everything kind of turns upside down, and he questions his identity, and he questions his kingdom, and that's where he kind of stumbles. And I think that's why he's probably the most, well, maybe the second most favorite character to Vivi, which is another one that I want to talk about, which was your first video that you kind of did a deep dive on. And I think he has maybe the most emotional weight out of every character in the game, because like he knows that he's on a time limit, more or less. He knows that he comes to the realization once he goes in the end of the ground, Black Mage facility, seeing that the mass production line, it's a real wow moment for him, and he questions his mortality throughout pretty much the entire game, and then it ends with acceptance. And that's something that you talked a little bit about in your deep dive of Vivi in the book, and as well as in your video. So talk a little bit about how, similar to Steiner, how Vivi's theme kind of like perfectly encapsulates his whole story arc through music.
Well, Vivi's theme is very special. I will say that not every theme of the main characters it's used that much across the game. But with Vivi, we start on Alexandria, moment one, and we hear his theme. And this is very consequential on how we get to understand the character. Like, at some point, the adventure, it feels that it's his adventure, it's his game, it's his story. And we do start playing with Vivi, but also the final message of the game, which I hope it's not spoiled, like more than 20 plus years that the game has been released. But the final message of the game is also his message, right? So his arc, story-wise, it's from beginning to end. For us as players, we see the whole progress. Now, musically, the theme has to combine first this perspective of him being like a kid, because he's a kid. He's full of curiosity, but also fears. He has to discover life. At the same time, he's a black mage. He's a very powerful character. And we see other black mages, right? Like Waltz number 3. They are machines of distraction, in theory, made for the army. So equilibrating those 3 different perspectives of a character in one music cue, it's difficult. I think Uematsu did such a good job that probably was the reason that it's used at the beginning for the whole Alexandria City scenario. Because otherwise, I guess the director would have said, like, okay, let's also have a song for Alexandria and leave just Vivi's theme for a little piece every now and then. But yeah, the music has those very clearly defined 3 parts. The curiosity and kind of naiveness as a second part, more like the introspection on his own self. And then the last one comes with a bit of percussion, bronze sound, and we get a little twist there where we feel the power of the black mage, that he is. Great character, honestly.
I think the thing about a lot of Final Fantasy IX's music and what makes it special is what I want to talk about next is it's such a contrast shift, or the tonal shift from Final Fantasy VII, which was very steampunk, dystopian stuff, pivoting from Final Fantasy VI, which was more, it wasn't necessarily like medieval knights and stuff, but like the background of Final Fantasy has been an evolution, and all the way up until Final Fantasy IX, which kind of pivoted, and it was a more retrospective look. It was more of like a tribute to Final Fantasy as a series up until that point. And what's interesting about this soundtrack is it has like a lot of medieval and folk vibes, as opposed to a lot of the other stuff that Uematsu did for previous games. So talk a little bit about like this soundtrack, which feels very like European inspired, and what kind of other things do you like hear reflected in this soundtrack as well?
To understand that, we need to consider the philosophy behind the game, right? I think that Uematsu and Sakaguchi, they got together. They really wanted to go back to the roots. What means going back to the root? I mean, you can even think about it on the artistic vision of the characters. They have big heads, small bodies, like kind of reflecting a bit of Final Fantasy VI and before. The game has so many Easter eggs of older Final Fantasies, and this is was all in purpose. Now, musically wise, it's well known that Uematsu had a little trip to Europe to get inspired on the castles. I don't know, I guess here in Germany or other around the area, but he brought his famous phrase about the topic is he wanted to know what was the pop music before the classical music. And here we're talking about basically pre-classical period. We can think about what you would hear on churches, for example, in Europe, right? Like hymns or more. It's basically what we would consider, like we would see on movies before classical music. So with all this inspiration, he came back to Japan, and then he composed a lot of folk music, but also with a lot of different influences. I think he had a specific collaboration with Kunihiko Kurosawa, which he was working at Reading Square for projects like Legend of Mana or Saga. And he took care also of bringing some rearrangements. He worked as an arranger for this project, and he brought very interesting instruments that really define the sound of Final Fantasy IX. So not only we have kind of the orchestra playing in many themes, but for example, the most famous song, A Place to Go Home, is like 3-4 recorders, basically. And this was arranged or played even by Kurosawa. A Place to Call Home specifically was rearranged for many other themes like Oilbird, Transcend Past, Ibsen Castle, and The Four Mirrors. And all of them try to also have like this very old school influence. If I recall properly, even Four Mirrors has kind of a Irish sounding style, and it really breaks a bit with what we were having in Final Fantasy 7 and 8.
One thing I've really liked watching you break down is I come from a music background. I kind of understand a lot of stuff and I take things for granted. So in your most recent video, which was you talking about Freya, you mentioned in each video there's kind of like some technical terms or words you should know, as we've called them, kind of breaking down technical terms and making them more easy to digest. Because if you're just an average casual listener or just an enjoyer of games, you might think, oh, this is cool, this sounds a bit different, and this isn't something that I can necessarily dance to, whatever. And this is like you bringing in polyrhythms, talking about Freya's themes, how you have I think it's set over 6/8 or 3/4 or something like that, and I'm using those different time signatures to all balance everything out. So talk about how Uematsu really just use these conflicting time signatures and conflicting patterns through use of polyrhythms to show like the inner turmoil within characters like Freya as well. It's very interesting, and again, it's just a really great thematic use of music to describe these characters, and it's something that only clicks once you understand them and you've played that game.
So I think that the usage of polyrhythms, it's very cultural driven, I would say. For some cultures it's more usual, for some others it was not, at least in the past. Right now, of course, we borrow all these elements for music styles, but in the case of Freya, for example, she's in a never-ending quest of searching for her love, and there's like no straight path, right? In the end, she finds Fradley her love, he doesn't remember her, and you need to showcase that through the music. And one way is looping, and I think that's why this song specifically for Freya, the rhythmic part loops eternally, kind of. Yes, we have some changes on the harmonies, but it's constant. And the second part is how the pitches, if we would have only a constant 4/4 or a constant 3/4 like rhythm, it will become kind of repetitive. But mixing up two different rhythms is like creating a complex. It's the same case as harmonies, right? If you will have a triad, it has a pure sound. We know how a major triad sounds, how a minor triad sounds. But when you start adding tensions, it has like this special spice that can create a very characteristic sound. And I think that was the objective of Uematsu, not just in there, but every time you use like polyrhythms, is creating a unique twist, a unique spice that defines the character. So, in my opinion, Freya's theme ends up being very hypnotic, if you would say so, like mixing up 6/8 with some 4/4 straight notes. And that's the whole idea that I tried to share on the videos, right? Like, okay, you hear a bit of the story of the character, but also you learn a bit of music on the process. A bit of everything, I would say.
Yes, and I think your breakdown of it was really good, and it shows like, this is only something again that you can understand if you've played the game or experienced certain moments in the game. So, what happens the first time you meet Freya? You meet Freya during like the Great Hunt in Lindblum, and then while you're in the throne room, one of the Burmesian soldiers drags himself to the throne room, and then you go with Freya to Burmesia, and then when you finally get there, it's raining, and that rain is a real great visual representation, and you mentioned this in your video, of those polyrhythms, of those certain themes that happen. And then there's also, yes, the contrast within Freya's character, or the conflict rather, of meeting Sir Fratley and him having amnesia and not remembering who he is. So like all this stuff really ties in to the music of the game so well. And one thing I wanted you to speak about a little bit, so for somebody who understands this stuff a little bit more, speak about the PlayStation 1's limitations. I mean, by the time, like in I think 2000 when this game came out, or 1999, we'd obviously moved to CD hardware, and Uematsu was a really great composer for even doing like the 16 and 8-bit games. Like the amount of constraints that he had hardware-wise in order to tell those stories was insane. Like when you actually understand how he composed that stuff. But talk a bit about how the PlayStation 1 kind of colored the sound of this game, like being able to use more like sampling based stuff and being able to get those like pan flute sounds that's very signature of Final Fantasy IX. I just think it's a great way to have colored the game.
PlayStation was a great piece of hardware. I'm a very big PlayStation fan, of course. And in retrospective, you could compare it, I don't know, with Super Nintendo or N64, which was the direct competition. And you would say like, well, they had CDs, right? 700 megabytes. Wow, amazing. It's endless. The power is infinite. But the reality is like, yes, you have 700 for storing the game, way more than what a Nintendo 64 cartridge could accept. But the sound processor only enabled you 512 kilobytes of RAM, which is not that much. You need it did have 24 different channels for 24 different instruments, but if you were trying to run basically real samples, record a real instrument, you would need to downgrade that into a few kilobytes, right? So there was a very big work done by Minoru Akai to enable the magic that Uematsu had in his mind to actually become real. And there's endless examples. When I was like trying to play around a bit with the files of the original game, for example, I discovered that there was like one specific Garnet song, right? Had like 4 very weird pitches, and it sounded like an alien, right? And I was like, what instrument is this? What I'm listening to? And at some point I was like, well, it's Garnet's theme, and I remember her singing, but what I'm listening is like, it sounds weird. And then I'm like, what if these guys, just because they needed to make everything smaller in kilobytes, they just speed up the voice of Garnet to make it work. So I grabbed those files and then I slowed them down, like, I don't know, 4 times. And then, voila, we had the voice of Garnet singing in the game. I was like, this is crazy, this level of optimization. I mean, we live in a world in which, I'm not going to say as a software engineer that we don't care about the space limitations. I mean, if you're composing music, you want to have optimizations on how many megabytes you're using. But back then, every single byte mattered, and that brought also creativity. Limitations help on creativity. So what this team did, like from Final Fantasy 7 to 9 on PlayStation 1, of course we can talk hours about Final Fantasy 6 and Super Nintendo, right? But these guys master the system, and you can really see the progression from Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 9. Better than 9, Chrono Cross maybe, which was around there, music-wise.
Yeah.
I don't think anything else got better.
it was a really great use of hardware and sound as well. Like, I really love the PlayStation 1 era soundtracks, and yeah, things only got better. And Chrono Cross is a really great example of it's probably in my like top three Final Fantasy or top three PlayStation 1 soundtracks, like Final Fantasy 9, 7, and then Chrono Cross as well. Fantastic bunch of games, and I really love the color palette that the PlayStation 1 gave. One thing that I don't have on my notes, but I think it would be good to talk to you about is using that constraint as not necessarily a limitation, but as maybe inspiration, knowing that like you only have so much space to compose for the game. Like, even look at, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be Final Fantasy 9 related, but like Final Fantasy 6, like that soundtrack overall is insane, and just knowing that's on a Super Nintendo cartridge is just mind-blowing, honestly. And like, consider like Dancing Mad, for example. That's, you know, a multi, you know, part piece all within like 15 minutes, and that's just on a Super Nintendo cartridge. And for somebody like you, yes, it's easy to download the MIDI, open it up in whatever program, like for me, Pro Tools, and then you can see all the tracks listed there. But like, talk a bit about like how limitation might actually have been inspiration rather than, you know, oh, gee, I can't really do this because I don't have enough space.
I think that limitation orders you, right? Even as a composer, you buy a package of 2,000 synthesizers, and then, I don't know, you spend 3 days to just listen to the first 100. And at some point, maybe you even give it up and you just grab your guitar, you know? If you only have 10 synthesizers to try, or 5, you will squeeze them out. And I think that's what this team did. A good example, for example, would be each of these sound processing channels, so again, PlayStation would have 24, they could only play one note at a time, right? So they could not really do the strum of a guitar on one of those channels. Why? Because when you strum a guitar, you play different notes, which each of them has a different sustain, right? The same for an arpeggio of a piano. You could play the chord, but you could not play like the arpeggio. So what these people did back then is they basically, if they wanted a guitar, they would use 6 channels. So 1 for each string, which is mind-blowing. I mean, these days, again, you grab Pro Tools Cubase and you just make an arpeggio with your MIDI keyboard, problem solved. These people, they program each of those 6 notes to play as a arpeggio, and we have beautiful themes like Aiko's theme with the guitars, which has 3 guitars. You can do the math. 6 channels each is 18 channels already. You need to be very careful what else do you add, right? Because you have 6 channels after that to add more stuff. They really thought well what to do. The limitation really orders you and sets you in a path that you think before doing. And I know it sounds basic, but thinking before doing a lot of time is the right decision.
Yeah, I certainly think we take a lot of this stuff for granted now because, like you spoke to earlier, you know, you can buy like a software pack of synthesizers, and then all of a sudden you have like everything available to you, but then you just have like option paralysis. You're overwhelmed with what to pick and how to pick it, how to use it. Whereas if you just have limitations, you know, you can just only use the tools available to you, and you're probably going to be more creative because of it. It's something that's certainly interesting about everything that Uematsu did all the way up until Final Fantasy X, which he was kind of like not as involved with 10, but still. The thing that I really love about you know, this whole experience, getting to know you and doing your videos, watching the videos, and even reading a bit of the book as well, is showing that this soundtrack can still resonate with somebody all these years later. And it's not just specific to Final Fantasy IX, but I want to direct this question specifically to Final Fantasy IX. What is it about this particular soundtrack that you think is still resonating with people, like why it still resonates with people, maybe more so than some of the other soundtracks within Final Fantasy as a series.
I think that besides being a beautifully executed soundtrack, we do like characters. We do like associating moments of characters with specific soundtracks. And that's why, I know, Erek's theme or Yuna's theme are so beloved, or to Samarkand. Because we match them to specific characters or specific moment of the story. And I think Final Fantasy IX has a bit of that. If you consider 8, we don't have a character's theme. If we consider 7, where's Cloud's theme, right? And I think that 9 really, first Garnet's theme is very beautifully developed across the game. Like, in the end, when we finally hear Melodies of Life, it's like you drop a tear, right? It feels very nostalgic. If you put the disc of Final Fantasy IX and start listening A Place to Go Home, the whole soundtrack has a bit of nostalgia, which doesn't happen in any other Final Fantasy game. You have Rose of May, you have the battle themes are cool, the town themes are nice. It's very cozy. Like, I think that especially for growing up with the game and listening to it later, some other soundtracks are less cozy. You know what I mean? Like, listen or any other Final Fantasy soundtrack and maybe it gets you a bit like excited and I don't know, you want to go to the gym or whatever. Final Fantasy IX soundtrack, yes, has great strong themes, but it's also very cozy. You could just drink a tea next to the fire and put that soundtrack. That nostalgia, I think it brightens a lot of hearts.
I agree. For being somebody who grew up with Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, if I was to look at what soundtrack probably is the coziest, it would be 9. 7 has these very dystopian vibes. I think 7 is probably, in my opinion, probably the more emotionally driven soundtrack. Maybe that's because I have such a heavy bias and people will call me out on this all the time, and I don't care. I love that game so much. 8 has a lot of beautiful moments, but 9 feels very small. It feels very, it feels teeny. I know you have the whole world of Gaia, I believe that the planet is called. But it just feels very small and accessible. And it might have to do with the fact that when you're walking around the world map, there's mist everywhere. It's funny because I know Square pivoted from the N64 to go to the PlayStation, but then they still ended up having like the Nintendo 64 fog on the world map, which is kind of funny. I never thought about that until now, but yeah, it's very cozy. It's very, very cute. And yeah, it's a soundtrack that I think will resonate with a lot of people once you kind of deep dive in it. And if you enjoyed the game like I do, this is why I wanted to bring you on today to chat about your channel and your book, which everybody can grab now. I'll leave a link down below again.
I would just like to mention just one more thing regarding the virtues of the characters. I think especially for those who read the book or watch the video or play the game in any order. It is very interesting because as fans or players, we remember whatever language you play the game on, Spanish, English, and for example, again, like Amarant is arrogance, his virtue, Vivi is sorrow, and so on. But when it comes to music decisions and how the music was created, it's related, of course, to the Japanese world, right? It's not that Uematsu was there and said like, hey, Sakaguchi, bring me the information in English. And of course, like any other translation, stuff gets lost. And the beautiful part of the Japanese ones is that normally it's made out of 2 kanjis, so 2 words, and that brings the meaning. And if you have the time, you can Google that, or you can read the book or whatever before playing the game, because it really carries a different meaning or a deeper meaning. Just to give a few examples. Garnet, for example, is devotion. Her kanji is kenshin, which it's the combination is two things. One is to offer or to dedicate, and the other one is body or self. So yes, devotion is a good translation to dedicate your whole body to something. In this case, it's her kingdom. But there are other ones, like for example, Steiner. Steiner is dilemma, and his word is kato, which is the combination of kutsu and wisteria, which is the entanglement of vines. So that's his brain. Like really, the description is like his brain is like something is going wrong there. He has two very different directions he should be taking, right? And like that is for all the characters. Like the one I talk in Freya's video is also one of the, in my opinion, a very sad one, which is despair. Which already despair is a strong word, but setsugo is to sever, to chop off, and the other kanji, because it's two, the other kanji is hope, right? So we are talking about chopping off hope. That's how the character is defined, which is very strong. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool to understand a bit how the director envisioned the struggle these characters would have to face in the game.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting look into how everything kind of forms the perfect painting, really. You have the color palette of the PlayStation 1's, sound processing. You have the direction of the characters through story, and then the direction of the music, and that all kind of like combines into this one vision, which is the music of Final Fantasy IX. And I think it's a really great example of everything being truly aligned into making something special that's resonated with people for many, many years. And it's not just, isolated to this game. It's every game, if you resonate with it. But I think Final Fantasy IX offers a really special insight into everything being perfect, stars aligned kind of stuff, and just made a really great, cozy, emotional, memorable experience for everybody who played the game growing up, like you and me, or even now for the first time. So I think it's a really great deep dive. And again, please check out Emmy's channel. He's got great insight. He's only got a few videos so far. So I would love to see everybody go over there and support him, because he's doing some great work, some great insight on the soundtrack for Final Fantasy IX. And I'm sure you've probably got plans to branch off to some other things eventually, but go buy the book, go support a wonderful art that this book is, and then the artist as well, the musician behind everything, and analyzing all that stuff. So I think it would be something well worth your time to check out. So Emmy, thank you for your contributions to the Final Fantasy community through the book and now your videos. I think it's wonderful deep dives, and I hope everybody has a chance to experience it.
Thanks a lot, Erek, for the opportunity, and good wishes for what's to come.